Dr. Lucie Low. Dr. Low is a scientific program manager for the NIH Tissue Chips for Drug Development Program at the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences at NIH, where she manages up to 50 transdisciplinary teams funded by the NIH to develop tissue chips, or organs on chips, potentially transformational tools for drug development. This includes all 9 of the Chips in Space teams. She is also the NIH and HHS NASA liaison point of contact, working to discuss and facilitate collaborations between NIH and other agencies and NASA on areas of overlapping agency interest. Today, she'll be providing an overview of the Tissue Chip program. Lucie, please feel free to begin. We can see your slides.
Okay, excellent. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for the invite to talk on the panel today. So I'm going to be shifting gears a little bit because I'm going to be talking about how NCATS and the work that we do, we push acceleration and we push science by, in large part, due to leveraging partnerships. And I'll talk a little bit about the program. I'll also talk a little bit about some of the Chips in Space projects that you've already heard a little bit about today. So just to kind of give an overview of what I'll be covering. So just who we are at NCATS, the Tissue Chip program, and then one of the things ISS National Lab asked me to talk about was how we work with pharma and the FDA to expand the use of tissue chip technology for drugs. So who is NCATS? We are the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences. We are one of the 27 institutes and centers that make up the NIH, and we're a little bit unusual compared to some of the other institutes because we are disease agnostic. So you might have heard of some of the other institutes, for example, the National Cancer Institute. Agnostic, we work very much on the process of translational science to transform the translational process so that new treatments and cures for disease can be delivered to patients faster. So what that means is that we work very closely on a number of things, but include drug development. So leading on, and I'll talk a little bit about the Microphysiological Systems Program, or Tissue Chips for Drug Screening. So we've already heard about some tissue chips and some organoids this afternoon or this morning, even depending where you're ticked over. But we've already heard from a couple of teams this morning who are doing tissue chip work. So tissue chips, as you know, mimic the biology and the structure and function of human organs and tissues. So the NIH Tissue Chip Program was started back in late 2011, early 2012, and was initially focused on creating platforms and systems that could be used in drug screening. So really working on understanding safety and efficacy of drugs as they go through the drug development pipeline. So yes, the program started in early 2012 and is still going on, but I'll explain a little bit about that in the second. But to begin, this was a 5-year program that was very much focusing on developing these resources and then testing them with reference sets of compounds to really see how they respond. And one of the critical parts of this program right from the very beginning has been that we have involved stakeholder end users. So different pharma companies, we've had agreements signed with them so that our developers have been able to get access to proprietary compounds, for example. But also importantly, we've been working with FDA right from the very start. So the idea was that if tissue chips go through development, they're going to be used by the pharmaceutical industry in the end. And so the pharma industry is going to be pushing that data that they're getting to the FDA. So it's very important that the FDA knows exactly what a tissue chip is and what their role is and how they can be helping throughout the drug development process. So we've been very close partners with Tissue Chip. They've been very involved partners all the way along this program. So moving on from 2012, and now here we are in 2020. So the program has really blossomed in the last 8 years or so. We've moved on from the Tissue Chips for Drug Screening program. We now have programs for disease modeling. We have the Tissue Chips in Space program. We have tissue chip testing centers, which I'll talk a little bit more about. We have some very specific programs which are focusing on modeling nociception, addiction, and overdose, and also the immune system on a chip. And we have recently just begun a clinical trials on a chip program, which is very much focusing on using tissue chips within the framework of clinical trials to help with decision making. So one of the ways that we have helped expand this program is really engaging and pushing everyone right from the very start to be talking to each other. So this is just a representation. It's actually a little bit outdated, but this is a representation of some of the people that we have involved in the consortium, which is all of the funded teams under those programs that I just showed you. And so while this is, quite a pretty little set of bubbles, what this actually looks like when you start looking at how teams is an absolute mess, because everyone is talking to everyone, but that's really what we want. So the idea is the more that there are discussions going on between our partners, then the better the outcome, because that enables leveraging of resources and expertise, and that's really helping push the. So a slightly easier slide, but it's really just also with external partners outside of NIH and outside of the Tissue Chip Consortium to help pull in people who might be interested to them about how it might be useful for their organizations, and start building relationships and building opportunities with lots of other people. So we have a number of different institutes and centers at NIH that have now started up their own tissue chip programs, and there's some really exciting and very specific organ specific and tissue specific projects that are currently funded by the organizations within HHS, which is Health and Human Services, which is the overarching agency that NIH to talk about how they make chips and discuss state of the science, discuss where there might be interest with other agencies. We've also been working closely with or monitoring what's been going on globally. So in Asia and Europe, that are both starting up many of their own organ on chip and tissue chip opportunities, as well as with the US, for example, as I've mentioned, the FDA, working closely with the IQ MPS affiliate, which is actually a group of pharmaceutical industry representatives that actually get together and have created essentially an affiliate where they are actively exploring where tissue chips might fit in the framework of use within pharma, and how we can partner with them. So we're really excited to be able to continue to engage with them. So other ways that we've been pushing and building confidence in tissue chip is very much building a framework that we see is going to help along this path to adoption and commercialization. So that's important for NCATS, because everything we do is designed to help disseminate technology to a broader audience, and that's very much always been the plan with tissue chips. So one of the ways that we've been doing that is actually working on this framework. And so the first sort of step of that framework that we see is the physiological aspects that need to be taken into account when talking about tissue chips. So here we're talking about creation of tissues, the structure and function of tissues as we would want to see. I refer to using training sets of reference compounds, and so we see that this responsibility is really a few years, and we've been very excited to see the progress they've made. So in the middle of that slide, the number 2 level, we've been talking about analytical validation of tissue chips. So I'll talk a little bit more about the tissue chip testing centers efforts that we have been pushing to help push that part of it. And then we really see that the top level, the number 3 level here, is industrial. So this is really talking about applied use of tissue chips within an industrial aspect. And so, for example, their use within a CRO type environment. And so I'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. Next slide, please. So talking about levels 2 and 3 of the previous slide, NCATS has been funding what we call the tissue chip testing centers, and now actually the next gen testing centers, who are independently funded centers that are, their remit is to onboard tissue chip technology and to validate it within their labs. And so what that means from our point of view is that they can onboard the technology, they can recreate the tissues and the systems within that within their labs in the same way that the developers have designed them to be used. And then they can start testing drugs and compounds and disease modeling as well within these independent centers as a way to really prove that the tissue chip technology is not only transferable between sites, but also that the systems perform as they are designed to perform. So we have funded 2 tissue chip testing centers, Javelin Biotech, which is a spin out from MIT, and Texas A&M has created their own tissue chip testing consortium. And so this is a list of some of the tissues and systems that they have been onboarding over the previous few years and testing within their organizations to really try and pin down exactly what these systems are best at, what kinds of things they can do, and how the technology is best suited for particular questions. Next slide, please. So unfortunately, now that I've lost the animations, but I've also wanted to point out that we've also been funding what we call the MPS Database, which is a centralized data hub that is designed to collect all of the information that is coming from the tissue chip testing centers and is being made available to the public. So the link is down there at the bottom. Anyone can create an account with the database, and they'll be able to see the data that is coming out from the testing centers. It's on tiered access. And a really key part of this is that we've had our partners at the IQ Consortium and the FDA have been enabled pre-competitive access to that. So through a series of legal paperwork that they've been able to sign, they've actually been able to see that data, which is very important for them when they're deciding whether or not to use microphysiological systems within their organizations, and for the FDA to really start seeing how the data is variable, how robust it is, what the best context of use is for each kind of tissue chip system, and how they can get involved with using the data and using the systems themselves. Next slide, please. So I can skim over this now because we've pretty much already covered it, but I was just going to talk a little bit about the Tissue Chips in Space program. So our Chips in Space program is a joint collaboration between the ISS National Lab, the National Institute for Biomedical Imaging and Bioengineering, and NCATS. Next slide, please. And we've already covered how we've had a couple of the teams talking this morning, but our aim really was to understand human disease and biology that would be really difficult to understand here on Earth, and using microgravity as a tool. Next slide, please. And that we had both scientific and technical benefits that we saw from that. And I don't need to talk about this anymore because Stephanie's slides already amply covered that. So next slide, please. So just my last couple of slides here. So one of the other key things that we find has been really important has been connection with commercial entities that are involved in developing and marketing organ-on-chip technologies, or MPS tissue chip technologies. And what's really exciting is that many of these companies are spin-offs or startups from academic institutions that are involved in the Tissue Chip Consortium, which is that bubble slide with all the red lines all over it that I showed earlier on. And so we've really seen an explosion, not just in within the consortium and within academia, but also on the commercial side of things as well. And this is really important because we want these companies to be successfully marketing their products and keeping us up to date and keeping us involved as they go along with that. Next slide, please. So this is my final slide. NCATS has worked really hard on developing many partnerships throughout the years to work together with other NIH institutes, other government agencies, a number of different non-profit organizations and commercial entities as well, and that we see lots of different opportunities for use of tissue chips. The Chips in Space program is going to be instrumental in helping develop the technologies that could be useful for some of those things. And we're really excited to see what the future holds here. And I think just click to the next slide, and that's my final slide. If anyone has questions, they are welcome to email me. I'm happy to share the slide deck so you'll be able to see the slides better. But yeah, that was it from me.